the three biorealms?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so thank you very much. My name is Sebastian, and today I'll be just kind of going over a book that I'm recently reading, and it's called The Three Biorealms: Biotechnology and the Governance of Food, Health, and Life in Canada. Now, this is authored by G. Bruce Doran and Michael J. Price. Now, to begin, I need to focus on what policy and politics are. And that is the fact that these influence daily life to such a degree that they become mainstream. And politics and policy are not estranged from us, but very much a part of who we are and what we do, how we think and behave. And that leads to the phenomenon of biotechnology. And according to Health Canada, biotechnologies involve the use of living organisms or parts of living organisms to provide new methods of production and the making of new products. Now, there's also another definition provided by the OECD, which is biotechnology as the application of science and technology to living organisms, as well as parts, products, and models thereof, to alter living and non-living materials for the production of knowledge, goods, and services. Also, please let me know through an email or so on if you want to find those references. Now, biotechnology is very much a part of who we are and what we do. Whether that may be through the productions of food, the organization of health, and biohealth. And those just mentioned are the three realms that the authors present in the text. So just kind of looking over the history of biotechnology, the authors span biotechnology in Canada to be about 3 decades. And they highlight that biofoods have the longest and more structured history compared to biohealth and more recently biolife. But they present their main arguments, which is 6 arguments, which I hope to present today. So biotechnology is altering boundaries, the boundaries between state, science and technology, the economy, society, and various other ideas or various ideas of democracy. Now, just looking, oops, sorry. Okay. So these realms are being shaped by various powers, various forms. And that kind of leads me to the second point, which is the powers that are influenced by biotechnology, in the sense of biotechnology shaping these powers and these powers shaping biotechnology. And that is business-dominated pluralistic power, which manifests as institutionalized structure and how that is created and is created by biotechnology. And we could clearly see that in the food industry, how there's different policies, different agencies, and so on, regulating food policy, food transport, and food export. And then the next power is networked power. So as is explained in the book, that includes partnerships between scientists, practitioners, NGOs, and so on, and how they relate to biotechnology. And the third power is self-disciplined power. Now, the individual, yes, is a part of society and is influenced by society. However, the authors argue that the individual also has something that's unalienable to themselves, that they have their decisions and lives, and which is best exemplified by the reproductive decisions that people make. So they are saying that biotechnology has a very personal aspect to it. Now, going to the third argument, which is fundamental political realities explain the presence of biotechnology in governance regimes. Now, what that means is it means that Canada, although influenced by biotechnology and although has interests in biotechnology, pretty much keeps biotechnology away from the top of the agenda. And the authors present that in Canada, compared to the United States, focus on, let's say, religion and biolife are a lot less prevalent. And they note that because the realm of the biohealth very much incorporates technology, biotechnologies, and the lives that we live. And that often leads to questions of meaning, purpose, which is very much tied to religion. And the fourth argument is biotechnologies have broadened the notion of what regulations involve. And these policies and regulations include taxation, spending, and that influences biorealms. So we have to question patents and so on and so forth. Just taking a sip of water there. And then the fifth argument is the increased networked nature of biotechnology makes it difficult to determine whether the overall regime is democratic. And what that means is the connectedness of biotechnology to government causes it to relate to the notion of democracy. Biotechnology, it is governed. However, due to its complexity, due to its intersections, it makes assessing biotechnology and leads to questions of, can it be accountable, leading to this unclear democracy, this unclear factor. And the democracies that have been highlighted by the authors are representative democracy, such as cabinets in Canada, federalized democracy, interest group pluralism, which is NGO involvement, different sector involvements. And then there's the direct democracy, what the people do and how they influence biotechnology. And then the last main argument is biotechnology is led by both science-based governments and precautionary governance. Now, science-based governments means the regulatory or the regulation of the product, so assessing its functionality, approval cycles. Now, all that is regulated by science-based governments. But precautionary governance is more influenced by laws, policies, and values of a particular state and whether they want to adopt or implement the biotechnology. So this was just an introduction to the issue of biotechnology and the main arguments presented by the authors. So just to conclude all that, it just goes to show that biotechnology is very much a very much integrated aspect in our society, but we have to understand how it works, how to regulate it, and how it influences ourselves. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I open the floor to any questions.
Thank you for that, Sebastian. That was very well done. And I suppose the lowest hanging fruit and the easiest question to ask is, what was the biotechnology which stood out most to you, if they provided specific examples? What was the one which stood out the most to you in terms of just being interesting and fascinating and perhaps cleverly developed, right? Sometimes like a clever development is just the one that seems so obvious, and how could no one have ever thought of this? And then moreover, what maybe seemed like the most shocking biotechnology that you learned about? One of the most seemingly impossible.
For sure. Now that's a great question. So at the start, the authors haven't really presented any examples other than the reproductive biotechnologies. So, and biotechnology as defined is just technology that has either biological aspects or that could kind of influence biology or organisms. And just looking at the reproductive way of life and how technology really influences like fetuses or in vitro reproduction and things like that, it just goes to show that indeed that technology influences the next generation, literally. So I think that really answers the second part of your question of what biotechnology has really shocked me. So that would go to like that reproductive industry and stuff like that. And then the other would go into the first question of what just generally interested me was maybe looking at the biofood realm. Now they didn't mention this, but recently I was looking online, and apparently there is modified meats that 3D printers can make. So like this bioprinter, and then it's part of this larger conversation about food and how technology could influence food. So what foods do we make, and what is considered natural food? So we could very much modify food. You know, that leads to the conversation of genetically modified organisms and food and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's just really interesting to look at. So yeah.
I mean, I feel like synthetically grown meat it's interesting. I think it's like really expensive. It'd be cool to try someday. I think it's something which is hard to like call. You know, it's all so arbitrary to say whether or not it's vegan, but
For sure.
I guess it has some interesting ethical questions for someone of that philosophy, right? But yeah, no, that's cool. Anyways, does anyone have any other questions they can think of?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for those questions, by the way. Yeah.
I believe with the 3D printing meat, I believe it actually takes less water consumption and like produces less greenhouse gas emissions though.
Yeah,
That makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't have to upkeep for a whole anatomical system. You would only need to upkeep for like the basic cells you need to eat, right?
yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, and then I read a really short introduction about it, and very much so. Yeah, you don't need the entire organism, just a few cells of the meat that you want. You feed it with the nutrients that you want, and then you kind of like just synthetically make the meat. And that the authors bring this point up, which is like that question of what's authentic, what is valuable, what is real. And then that's where the questions of, that purpose, that what is, that religious aspect comes into, right? So what is like a real thing? Is this something I should be consuming? Is it natural? So he brings up a lot of that conversation. But yeah, just like practically speaking, having like synthetic made meat can answer or may answer a few of our questions with regards to like, do we have enough food to feed the world and stuff like that? But yeah.
I mean, an interesting question to ask. I sent Ahmed a bit ago an article on this, synthetically grown organs or maybe organisms which could reproduce on their own or whatever. But like, here's a question that one needs to ask, and obviously asking you to answer it right now is kind of ridiculous. But imagine you start growing organs or perhaps cells in a petri dish, right?
Right.
At what point can you call that thing a human, right? For example, if you're growing human cells and tissues,
right.
At what point can you call that thing a human, and at what point does it have its own, its own rights or whatever?
Right, and I think that was segue nicely into what you do, into consciousness and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, you could also ask, at what point is this thing conscious? There's a sort of long history of argumentation, which is like, can you have consciousness in a vat, right? Can you maybe have a brain with no sensory input but still be conscious? But anyways, okay.
There you go. Yeah, great conversation, but I can't answer that, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay.